Good day, everybody. My name is Matthew Phillips. I'm a neurologist in New Zealand, and today I'm going to talk about Parkinson's and mitohormesis. This is for the 2024 Insight into Parkinson's Congress. Let's begin. We often have a shallow view of things. The ancient Buddhist text described here mentioned one of the earliest versions of a well-known parable known as the blind man and the elephant. I'm sure many people know about this parable. It describes a group of blind men who each feel a different part of an elephant's body, after which they describe that elephant based on their own limited perspective of what they felt. So this guy here feels the tusk and thinks it's a spear. This guy here feels the trunk and thinks it's a snake. This guy feels the leg and he thinks it's a tree. This guy feels the body and thinks it's a wall. And this guy here feels the tail and thinks it's a rope. Of course, these guys all have different descriptions, and when they differ, they come to blows because they think that the other is dishonest. The truth, of course, is that none of them have seen the elephant in its entirety, and so they've sort of missed the forest for the trees. I think we sort of do this in Parkinson's. Parkinson's is often described by its parts, so its motor symptoms, the Parkinsonism. So that would be like the tremor, rigidity, and slowness, and so on. The changes that we see on scans in the basal ganglia, a certain part of the brain, and also the Lewy bodies, which are the abnormal proteins that we find within the basal ganglia structures that are affected. But there's much more to Parkinson's than this. This is just sort of scratching the surface. If we look at it in its entirety, we can see there are many non-motor and even non-neurological symptoms, such as those relating to mood disturbances, sleep problems, urinary problems, gastrointestinal problems, and pain, and there's many more. And there's also pathology or problems within the body elsewhere, even outside of the nervous system. So virtually the entire digestive tract, the muscles, kidneys, skin, and there's a lot more places that are abnormal in Parkinson's if you look hard enough. So really, Parkinson's is more than just the things that we typically look at and treat in the hospital and in the clinic. It's actually it's a widespread multi-system disorder, meaning it's a whole body disorder. And if that's the case, it really needs a systemic therapy targeting the neurological symptoms themselves, or the basal ganglia changes, or even the Lewy bodies isn't going to be enough to really make a significant difference to this disorder in the long term. We need something that affects the whole body and makes it better on a systemic level. So let's look at a deeper perspective that relates to that. Energy flow. We often ignore the role of energy flow within the body. Why? Because it's really hard to sort of conceptualize. You get a picture like this and you go, wow, that looks really nice, but what does it actually mean? Well, energy can't really be conceptualized. You can't scan it. You can't really draw a picture of it very well, but it's extremely important nonetheless, and it's vital to life in general. Energy flow, so the creation and the distribution of it throughout the body, is really down to these things called mitochondria. And these are little organelles. There's a few hundred or a few thousand in almost all our cells, but they move around the cell and they change shape. They're not always ellipsoid like shown there. And they do all kinds of things, but one of their crucial functions is to coordinate energy flow and metabolism, which is all the biochemical reactions in the body, and basically keep us alive. In Parkinson's, there is substantial evidence that these mitochondria are impaired on many different levels. So many different functions and activities and so on that they do are impaired. And so I call it impaired mitochondrial biology because their entire biology is a bit messed up in Parkinson's. And this is probably fundamental to the pathogenesis of Parkinson's, or that is why a person develops this disorder in the first place. So let's look at the different levels of mitochondrial biology that are impaired. There are 6 of them. There's some big words in this one, but just, you can pause it and read them, and we'll go slowly. So the first of these 6 levels is basically in Parkinson's, there's impaired cellular metabolism in certain areas, particularly in the neurons and the muscle cells. And metabolism is just the biochemical reactions inside the cells. And so, mitochondria are sort of central coordinators of metabolism. And so that's the first level. The second level is that you get this thing called impaired cell-specific mitotypes. A mitotype is just the kind of mitochondria that exists in a certain type of cell. For example, there's a different mitotype, looks different, behaves differently in a neuron, a substantia nigra neuron, as opposed to a skeletal muscle cell, okay? So these can be affected in Parkinson's too. Level 3, the mitochondria behave a little funny in Parkinson's. And so there are a number of different mitochondrial behaviors. I'm not going to get into the details, but just understand that they do behave, move around, sort of fuse and divide a little strangely in Parkinson's too. They have impaired functions in Parkinson's. So complex processes inside the mitochondria are disrupted. And also activities are disrupted. And the activities refers to simpler processes inside the mitochondria. And finally, the structure of the mitochondria, the actual molecular components of the mitochondria. If you look at the small molecules, they're a bit disrupted in Parkinson's too. So don't worry about the details of this. I just wanted to show you if you're interested in this kind of thing. But the take-home point from this slide is that mitochondria are impaired on many levels, many complex levels. So it's not an easy fix. You're not going to be able to target this level or that level or this part of this level or this part of that level. You want a therapy that somehow improves the whole thing, the whole spectrum of mitochondrial biology. Now, what causes this impaired mitochondrial biology in the first place? So I'm going to look at factors specific to Parkinson's. There are many of them, but I submit that most of them relate to the environment and the modern lifestyle, which is a big problem for not just Parkinson's, but a lot of other disorders probably too. So the first thing I'm going to look at, we know that in Parkinson's, exposure to a number of things like heavy metals, particularly lead and a few others, pesticides and herbicides is a problem, and also certain chemicals. So chemicals you find in paints, chemicals you find in household cleaners, and so on. These are all associated with increased chance of developing Parkinson's, and probably is not a good thing. The modern dietary lifestyle is probably a big culprit. It might be number one. I probably put it up at number one, but whatever. It's one or two. It's up there with the toxins there. So the problem with the modern dietary lifestyle is it's too many meals throughout the day. So 4 to 6 meals a day is the average in New Zealand. We didn't eat that as hunter-gatherers. It's abnormal. And also the meals are too high in processed carbohydrate. And also the processed carbohydrate often comes with a fair amount of fat as well. So, it's the high processed carbohydrate plus the fat. It's a real problem. It creates a nutritional overload for our mitochondria. And when we don't have enough fasting in there, they don't have enough time to recover. Sedentary behavior, so particularly insufficient physical stimulation, lack of exercise, in other words, is associated with Parkinson's risk. And also so is social isolation. So not getting enough good social interaction. Poor sleep is a risk factor for Parkinson's, and it's also strongly associated with the disorder later on, of course. And there are genes that are associated with the development of Parkinson's. This is a small minority of people where the genetic factors are strong. So genes like PINK1 and Parkin, and there's a few others, mutations in those lead to development of Parkinson's. And guess what? They also damage the mitochondria on several levels as well. So these triggers, importantly, can impair the mitochondria two ways, either directly through direct damage, such as the industrial toxins there, or they may not impair them directly, but in a more subtle, indirect manner by forcing the mitochondria to adapt and adjust in an abnormal manner that makes them sort of not as good at doing what they need to do in their features, activities, functions, behaviors, and so on later on. So maybe all this leads to Parkinson's. Most of the triggers are environmental here. That's really important, okay? The genetic factors are important, particularly for a small minority of people, maybe 5 to 10% of people with Parkinson's, but they're less important than the environmental factors. Now, I'm going to show you a slide here that wraps everything I just said together. So if you've borne with me till here, that's a good thing. Viewing Parkinson's as a metabolic iceberg allows us to portray the deeper aspects of it all in one shot. Okay, now this iceberg is 3 components: a tip, a bulk, and a base. The tip emerges as a downstream effect of the bulk, and the bulk is triggered by factors at the base. The tip consists of the sort of more obvious things in Parkinson's that the blind man can see, if you're using that analogy. The motor symptoms and the Parkinsonism, the changes in the basal ganglia in the brain, and the Lewy bodies that are very obviously seen in the cells of the basal ganglia. Now, in the bulk, this is more hidden, but it's probably far more important as a causal factor in Parkinson's. And this describes the 6 levels of impaired mitochondrial biology that I went through: the impaired metabolism, mitotypes, behaviors, and functions, and so on. Okay, that's there. And then underneath all of this, at the base, is collectively the factors that trigger the impaired mitochondrial biology in the first place. So you're talking about the heavy metals, the pesticides, chemicals, the modern dietary lifestyle, so too many meals and meals with lots of processed carbohydrates, combined with fat, physical inactivity, social isolation, poor sleep, and in some people, small minority of people, mind you, the mutant genes. This iceberg perspective is really meant to clarify what Parkinson's is in its entirety. And the important thing is I like it because it shows me what the cause of Parkinson's is, but more importantly, it shows me, well, if I know the cause of Parkinson's, that means maybe I can make a difference to preventing it or helping a person who has it, so as a therapy. And the key, of course, is to treat the base to improve the bulk, which maybe improves the tip features as a downstream effect later on. Okay, this introduces us to mitohormesis. This might be the way to improve the mitochondria. And mitohormesis is just a thing that involves exposing mitochondria to a challenging but not overwhelming stressor, followed by a complete but not excessive recovery. So you want to get a stress recovery oscillating balance between the two. And this leads to, if you do this long enough, a recalibration of mitochondrial biology, a healthy one, not a maladaptive adjustment, but a good adjustment that makes them better and more resilient against higher, normally harmful exposures to similar stressors in future. That's the idea of mitohormesis. Importantly, mitohormesis is a yin and yang thing, okay? It's a balance between stress and recovery. You don't want to stress them too much. So you don't want to do tons of cognitive stimulation and exercise and whatever all the time. You need to balance that with a recovery. You don't want to just sit around and recover all the time either, right? You need to have some stress. So it's a balance between the two. And that is the key. Health is really achieving an oscillating balance, because you don't want to sit in one area or the other all the time. Okay, I'll talk about a few strategies here that a person with Parkinson's might be able to use to optimize mitohormesis, improve their mitochondrial biology. And this would be relevant to anyone really, but I'm going to focus on Parkinson's, obviously. I think the modern lifestyle is the main trigger of Parkinson's. It does not stimulate mitohormesis. It does not facilitate that nice balance between stress and recovery at all. And I'll show you what I mean. It consists of inadequate or sometimes excessive stressors, and it consists of very inadequate and sometimes very excessive recovery phases. So here's my chart. I'm going to focus on 5 aspects of the modern lifestyle that I think are the biggest culprits in Parkinson's. There are more than this, but I'll focus on these 5. So I put industrial toxins and dietary lifestyle at the top in no particular order. You know, one might be more important than the other, but I think they're both very important. And then cognitive behaviors, physical behaviors, social behaviors are the next 3. And this is based on evidence. This is not just me making it up. So industrial toxins, probably there's excess exposure to industrial toxins. So that is an excess stressor on people. And we know that people who work with the industrial toxins, so particularly people who are working with pesticides, herbicides, paints, and things like that on a regular basis, they seem to get a higher risk of developing Parkinson's. And of course, you need to, there needs to be a balance there with the recovery phase. But the main problem here with the toxins is excess stress or too much toxin exposure. In terms of the dietary lifestyle, we probably have an excess stressor phase in the feeding. We have a nutrient onslaught because people eat too many times a day. And it's when they do eat, it's processed carbohydrates, which really are difficult for our body to metabolize and deal with. It's a big hit on the body. I won't get into the details, but it is, particularly if you combine fat with the processed carbs at the same time. At the same time, if you go to the right column, the recovery phase, we have insufficient fasting periods. So maybe if you had a big meal, like a bad Western diet meal once a day, and you had a lot of fasting, 23 hours of fasting, you could recover. But most people eat too many times a day, and it doesn't allow us to recover our mitochondria properly. cognitive behaviors, physical behaviors, social behaviors. So we probably get insufficient stressor in all three of these departments. We don't get enough cognitive stimulation, particularly when we retire and we have less to do. We don't get enough exercise, that's a problem. And we probably don't get enough really authentic social engagement. As we know, social isolation is a definite risk factor for Parkinson's. On the recovery side, we probably also don't get enough. We have a inadequate recovery phase for all three of these things. And if you're doing these things during the day, you're stimulating your brain, you're exercising your body, you're engaging socially, you need to have periods where you recover and allow your brain to adjust to what that experience was. And so that's where your sleep and relaxation comes in. And we're basically sleep deprived. Most people are a bit sleep deprived and have incomplete relaxation protocols and chronic stress levels that are higher than they need to be. So we need to have a balanced oscillation between these stress and recovery phases. And I'm just going to talk a little bit more about how to achieve that in the last couple of slides here. In terms of industrial toxins, this is a pretty easy one. As I said, what you want to aim for is periods of low and transient exposure to heavy metals. It's hard to avoid these things in the modern day and age unless you go live in a cabin in the woods. With no amenities of civilization, but you want to get transient and low dose exposures as much as you can to pesticides and chemicals and things. So if you do this as an occupation, that means obviously you need to figure out ways to protect yourself from these things. And there needs to be public policies, occupational policies associated with this that make sure people don't get excessively exposed. And then, a good way to obviously mitigate the effects of any toxins is to have zero exposure to them for prolonged periods, which allows a person's mitochondria to completely recover, hopefully completely recover from any previous exposures they had to the heavy metals, pesticides, and chemicals. So a person can optimize their mitohormesis on this one by really making a focused choice to oscillate between low-dose transient industrial exposure and lengthy periods of zero exposure, and really just minimize exposure to these day-to-day toxins and thinking about what am I exposed to that might be unhealthy for me. Dietary lifestyle. So to develop a nice healthy oscillation between stressor and recovery phase here, you probably want to indulge in evolutionary based hunter-gatherer diets. So pre-agricultural diets were basically ketogenic, or they were low carb or low to moderate carb. And that's just what our ancestors evolved on. With agriculture came a lot more carbohydrates. Of course, our hunter-gatherer diets were minimally processed. And so, and as I said, they were carbohydrate restricted. Now, a high carb, low fat diet would be okay too, because it's not as hard on the mitochondria, because you basically want to limit carbs or fat very much. But I think the high fat, low carb diets have the edge because they're more evolutionary based. In terms of recovery phases, you need fasting protocols. That's really the only way to do this, I think, properly. Particularly intermittent fasting, just having a sort of a 12 to 23 hour period every day would be great, where you have no food coming in, just a bit of water, tea and coffee. Tea and coffee, caffeinated, seems to be a pretty good thing for Parkinson's, so maybe beneficial, not sure. But really incorporating this kind of dietary strategy would be a good thing. So a person could optimize their mitohormesis by oscillating between minimally processed carbohydrate restricted foods and periods of fasting. If you do this, I think it would be very helpful for Parkinson's. In terms of cognitive, physical, and social behavior, there's a few things we can talk about here. So cognitive training. So you want to have periods of the day where you're actually stimulating your brain. And they study this more on things like Alzheimer's and dementia than Parkinson's. So it's not as strong in Parkinson's, but I think it would be a good thing to just make sure you're doing activities that focus, require some attention and promote engagement of some kind, make you think a bit. You also should be doing some exercise, of course. It should be relatively brief, though, and it should make you puff a bit, get you a bit out of breath. So reasonably intensive. I favor strength-based protocols, particularly in elderly. Well, in general, I do. But aerobic is better than nothing, obviously. So this is a good thing to do as well for your mitochondria and health in general. Support groups, social stimulation, getting some authentic social connections going, not allowing yourself to be, socially isolated is a very good thing for mitochondrial health. And there's interesting work coming out showing that this can enhance mitochondrial biology, just having nice social connections. Now, on the other side here, getting some nice recovery phases in. So sleep is a big problem. Like getting adequate sleep opportunity in a dedicated environment is huge. So, getting it really dark, getting it quiet or with a bit of white noise or brown noise or something, having no electronics in the room, and all these good sleep hygiene measures, that's really key for health, mitochondrial biology, and probably help someone with Parkinson's. Deep rest, relaxation practices. So not just resting, but like focusing resources on making sure it's this thing called deep rest, which is where your body really gears down and gets into this nice state where you can recover mitochondrial biology. Things like breath work, mindfulness, meditation, forest bathing are all very good at this. The non-sleep deep rest protocols or NSDR protocols, very good at this. You can Google those if you have never heard of those. Relatively prolonged recovery periods. If you do it, so when we were talking about physical activities, having a proper recovery period between exercise sessions. If you do a proper recovery exercise session, you should have a few days of recovery, okay? Exercising every day is probably not a good thing. It's probably a bit too much stress on mitochondria. You need to throw some breaks in there. And then there are, in terms on a social level, to balance your authentic social connections, you want to have, we're going to use the technology a little bit. We're going to watch television, use the internet, digital media, and so on at some point. But you want to take breaks from all those things, particularly social media, I'd say, and just make sure you have some sort of digital media fasts periodically, just to give your brain a break from all these technological wonders. Okay, so you can optimize mitohormesis by oscillating between active daytime activities and dedicated sleep and rest practices. All right, so I'll sum all that up now. Parkinson's is basically, it is a widespread multisystem disorder. Okay, that is how it should be viewed. And it's due to impaired mitochondrial biology throughout the body. I think the evidence for that continues to accumulate. Parkinson's can be conceptualized as a metabolic iceberg. And this is very helpful for seeing its entirety, okay? It shows the whole elephant that is Parkinson's. So you're not going to be one of those blind men getting into arguments about with other people about what is Parkinson's and what is the best way to treat it. By allowing our mitochondria to undergo mitohormesis, they can recalibrate and improve on many levels. This is a very good thing. I showed you some of the major ways you can do it. There are other ways I did not have time to go through, but there's a lot of ways that a person can do this. Mitohormesis is best achieved by a balanced oscillation between a challenging stressor phase and a complete recovery phase. It's not about sitting in one phase or the other for prolonged periods of time. You've got to use both. You've got to go really far into both and balance them out. Okay, thanks a lot for watching the talk. My name is Matthew Phillips, and I do hope that you have a wonderful day.